Let's start this section with individual exposure in extent. So the sensor that will allow the person or entity carrying out the industrial espionage operation to reach the person, to reach the individual. We'll start with the first factor, the human intelligence card, which is also called the human intelligence factor. The human intelligence sensor, by definition, seeks to obtain information whose source is an individual. Information that is held by the individual. This information can be obtained either free or for a fee. That person will give him/her naturally the information or in return for payment, which should be financial or for something else. We could think of a visa or work permit in certain cases, for example. This human intelligence operation is either directly directed at the employee or indirectly. In other words, there are two cases. Either the person seeking to obtain the information will come into contact directly with the employee who holds the information, or through another person who knows the employee. Generally speaking, we must consider that a human approach is an operation that takes place over a very long period of time, and we will see later the different stages of this human intelligence operation. First of all, we need to understand the mice approach, what we call the levers. The levers are in fact different psychological aspects of a person that will have an impact on his actions. MICE is an acronym that stands M for money, I for ideology, C for compromise, and E for ego. Money, ideology, compromise or blackmail, and ego. These four elements are what make up the motivations that drive a person and which, if they are well used, can lead this person to betray, to do something he or she should not do, and therefore, in the end, to pass on confidential information. These different motivations that will lead to betrayal can be country, can be a cause, can be one's employer because he has no recognition, for instance, can be the business partner, friends, family, for instance. If we look at each of these levers one by one, the first one, money. Why would a person be receptive to this lever? I think it's quite simple. We can all imagine it to obtain a higher economic or social status than the one that we have at the moment. To have wealth, wealth means being able to show it to others or to acquire goods. It could be to finance work, to finance a trip, or in any case, something we don't have and we would like to have. So it's not the money itself that it's going to be interesting, but the effect it's going to have on the person. Ideology is by definition something that is based on a strong belief. This belief can be of several kinds. It can be religious belief, it can be patriotism, as we saw earlier, it can be political, ecological, societal ideal, a way of seeing things. These are values that are well anchored and which, in the course of an individual's and human life, are very unlikely to evolve or change. It is generally any idea that is based on an absolute. People who are motivated by ideology leverage are people who are relatively manipulable in the short, medium, and long term. This is exactly what happens in a radicalization process, the prison radicalization process, for instance. And this is also what happened through the media. That is to say that from the moment certain media have decided to convey certain ideological currents, receptive people will be easily manipulated once again in the long term. There are also two elements that need to be mentioned here, which is that the ideology can also be based on an exacerbated sense of duty. We are no longer dealing here with patriotism in conjunction with one or the other three levels, which means that in general ideology will be used and then another level at the same time to establish the manipulation. Finally, the last thing is that this ideological level make the relationship more reliable, which is what I was saying just now about the fact that these people, once we touch this level, will be manipulable in the long term. It's a pretty powerful lever to create a reliable relationship over time. If we now move on to compromise or blackmail, a compromised person is a person who has done actions, who has committed acts that make him or her criminally or socially culpable. We see that there is either an action of one that is problematic from a legal point of view or an action that is problematic from a morality point of view. Examples of compromise can be stories of morality, such as extramarital relationships, where photos have been taken as evidence of an extramarital relationship, economic stories, such as tax evasion, proof that a person has committed tax fraud, where they threaten to denounce them. Also, common crimes such as pedophilia, reprehensible behavior. In return for a service, the person is asked not to make his or her action known to the public, which is what happens in politics, for example. There are also financial problems. The person is completely in debt, has too many unpaid taxes, too many debts, and we go to see them and explain that we know their problem and offer to solve them in exchange for this or that service. We can also have case of statutory compromise. The regularization of a legal situation, for example, a missing residence permit. In some situations, it is possible to solve these problems and the person will act for a benefit as they have no real alternative. The danger of using compromise is the problem of guilt, as these people will at some point feel guilty or burn out when they do the service they are supposed to do. Compromise is the opposite of ideology. Some ideology is something very reliable and works well in the short, medium, and long term. Compromise works rather well, but very rarely in the long term because after a while people will simply crack and they will prefer to go on to see the police to explain what has happened rather than to continue. The last level, ego. This means acting or doing things to feel valued. It is really in this sense that we will approach the person who will feel valued by another person or group of people, being the center of attention, being the leader, being important, feeling important with their social circle. People with big ego are often very receptive to this notion of social class, and what they want is to be well seen within their circle. This leads to danger since those kind of person with a strong ego will tend to persist, to be stubborn, so as not to lose face right to the end, even if they know that they are wrong. This is a problem of risk assessment for these people and the possibilities of harming themselves in order to conform to the system of value that they put them forward. In conclusion, ego is clearly a powerful motivator that can be detected quite quickly. In general, people with an overinflated ego, if you go for a drink with them, for instance, this is something that comes out very quickly during the discussion and at a very early stage and will be used against the person in question. The different levels are what make up the whole psychological approach to human intelligence, and we will see That this human intelligence is divided into several phases, and we'll now study each of these different phases. Once it's done, the cycle can begin. We will discern 4 different phases: environment phase, approach phase, recruitment phase, and end of relationship phase. Each phase is compulsory and systematic. There is no cycle where one of these phases does not come into play. This process can be interrupted at any time, at any phase, if the person carrying out the industrial espionage operation realizes that the risk is too high. The environment phase is a preparatory stage whose aim is to obtain a maximum of information on the person in question, on his or her entourage, on his or her habits, in order to understand who this person is without having direct contact with him or her. This also allows the person in charge of the industrial espionage operation to verify that this person does indeed hold the information sought or has access to the information that is sought. This also allows the preparation of the 3 following stages and thus the definition of an approach strategy. Generally speaking, this environment phase can last up to 6 months before the decision is made to launch the second phase. We will see an example of an environment phase, more specifically the first contact that will trigger the next phase.
J'ai reçu ma première grande mission très vite après ma sortie de l'école. Je suppose qu'on m'avait choisi pour mes origines françaises car la mission devait se dérouler à Paris. Cet homme était ingénieur atomiste. Il travaillait à Paris sur un projet de centrale nucléaire que la France livrait à un pays hostile à Israël. Ce pays, tout le monde s'en doutait, cherchait à développer des armes de destruction massive contre nous. Nous devions pousser cet homme à nous livrer les plans de la centrale. Si celle-ci devait servir à des fins militaires, notre gouvernement envisagerait alors de la détruire. Dans un pays ami, les opérations doivent se dérouler en douceur. Cet homme ne devait jamais savoir qui nous étions. On appelle ça une manipulation, et la manipulation est notre métier.
Ça joue. Ça va? Je m'excuse, j'ai joué la balle, hein. Rien de cassé, j'espère. Non, je crois pas. Je suis désolé, hein. Ça va, fille? Vous avez pas des câbles par hasard? Des câbles? Non, pourquoi? Vous êtes en panne? Il n'y a plus de batterie. Je sais pas pourquoi. Tiens, mettez ça dessous. Ouais.
We can see that the environment phase has been validated. We know that this person has the information that we want. The environment has made it possible to establish that this person is playing football at a specific moment, and this is the moment chosen for the first contact to be made. We will then play on this contact, on this car, which has broken up, on the football side, which is completely outside the person's activity, outside the nuclear sector to establish this first contact. Then we continue with the approach phase, which is what was started with this first contact. The first objective is to obtain the person's trust by following the strategy defined during the environment phase. It is therefore necessary to identify the flows as accurately as possible based on the different levels we have seen before to enable this relationship to be anchored in the long term to ensure that it is as long-lasting as possible. The strategy that was defined during the environment phase is a strategy that can be readjusted at any time according to the new elements that we obtain during this approach phase. Finally, this approach will enable us to find out a little more about the target's environment, about his family, about his habits, to have a different angle from that which was perceived during the initial environment phase. The last thing to note is that we have seen that the environment is something that can last about 6 months more or less, while the approach can last a year or more before really moving on to the recruitment phase, before trying to access the information that's being sold. Let's look at a second video example, still on this approach phase.
Pourquoi tu souris?
Non, parce que vraiment, je peux pas m'empêcher de le trouver sympathique. Quand je pense qu'il va nous permettre de détruire cette centrale, je l'aime bien.
Alors si tu te demandes pourquoi tu le trouves sympathique, tu vas lui répondre ça?
Tu sais, ça aide de jouer les sentiments qu'on éprouve vraiment.
Ok, mais pourquoi Hayden le trouve sympathique?
Tu veux que je te dise pourquoi je le trouve sympathique? Parce qu'il a l'air sincère. Il n'a pas d'arrière-pensée. Je peux enfin parler à un type que je soupçonne pas de vouloir me planter un couteau dans le dos.
Et qu'est-ce qui lui fait dire que toi, tu n'as pas d'arrière-pensée?
Je suis simple avec lui, je lui pose pas de questions.
Justement, c'est bizarre, un type qui n'est pas curieux.
Je crois que ça va.
Qu'est-ce que tu lui as demandé? À quelle question a-t-il répondu volontiers? Sur quoi est-il resté vague? Qu'est-ce qu'il t'a dit de lui-même? Reprenons tout dès le début.
Les affaires. Tu sais ce que c'est les affaires? C'est tout simple. Tu cherches quelqu'un qui a besoin de quelque chose, tu cherches le quelque chose, tu l'achètes à quelqu'un qui a besoin de le vendre mais qui sait pas qui a besoin de l'acheter, et tu le revends en faisant un gros bénéfice.
Ah, dis donc, fallait que je te remercie là, pour l'autre soir. Le restaurant que tu m'avais indiqué. Françoise était admirative.
Moi, ma femme, il y a longtemps qu'elle ne m'admire plus.
Tu plaisantes?
Je peux pas avoir d'enfants. T'as des enfants?
Non.
Excuse-moi, je suis indiscret. Tu reprends l'autre café? Non, non, non.
Ni pour son travail, ni pour...
Évidemment.
On la touche pas.
Non.
Françoise n'a pas de frères et sœurs.
Non.
Sa mère habite dans Luberon. S'il lui arrive quelque chose, il est probable que Françoise ira la voir.
C'est probable. Ouais.
Faut qu'il lui arrive quelque chose. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Jambes. Les deux jambes. Elle sera immobilisée pendant quelque temps. François sera obligé d'aller auprès d'elle. Au moins 1 ou 2 semaines, ça nous laissera assez de temps.
Téléphone. C'est bon.
Est-ce que je pourrais parler à monsieur Hayden, s'il vous plaît? Rémi Prieur.
Bonjour, ça va bien?
Bonjour, je te dérange pas?
Pas du tout.
Tu travailles le samedi?
Ça m'arrive. Tu devais pas partir en province?
Non, ma femme est partie toute seule.
Alors, on est deux célibataires ce soir.
Ouais.
Prends un verre
D'accord.
Écoute, je finis un truc et je te rappelle. On se retrouvera à l'hôtel.
D'accord.
C'est quoi ton numéro?
47 70 64 64.
47 70 64.
We can see that the person who made the first contact discusses with others what he or she has seen in order to perfect the environment of the objective and to anchor this relationship over time. It is clear that the discussion with the other people allows him to update the strategy that was defined, to have different angles on Rémi Prieur, to have family angles, try to find common points. He mentions the fact that he has not been able to have children, while knowing that Rémi Prieur and his wife do not have any, and so he tries to find out more about him while trying not to go too quickly, not to rush him in this relationship. That's why they decide at one point to produce an event, which means that his wife will have to go away in the hope that Rémi Prieur will finally contact his new friend Bill. That is what the target does, and what will speed things up as it proves that trust is established, that the target trusts Hayden enough to call him when his wife is away, and so it anchors the relationship. In the second part of the approach, the objective will be to identify the lovers based on the mice approach. This will start from the moment when there is a one-to-one meeting on a weekend evening between Rémi Prieur and Bill Hayden. Let's have a look to this second phase.
Vous vous rendrez ce soir à l'hôtel Hilton vers 21h. Je vous montrerai dans la chambre de Monsieur Hayden.
Monsieur Hayden, d'accord.
Et là, vous vivez la suite des événements avec Naturel.
D'accord.
Comme on m'a dit que vous saviez très bien le faire.
Vous voulez essayer?
Ça va? Elle va pas tarder. Elles sont toujours à l'heure.
Non, elle est formidable, cette salle de bain.
Je choisis toujours mes hôtels en fonction de la salle de bain. Et du lit aussi. Tiens, essaie un peu celui-là. Oui? Oui, c'est moi, oui. Pourquoi? Je devais le voir demain. Qu'est-ce qu'il a dit? Et qu'est-ce qui s'est passé?
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir. Entrez. J'en prie.
Et qu'est-ce que je pourrais faire de plus?
Asseyez-vous.
Je suis obligée?
Ah non.
Bon. Non, je vais venir alors. Oui, j'arrive tout de suite. Je suis désolé, j'ai une affaire urgente à régler. Je vais essayer de pas être trop long.
Ah, mais si tu veux, on peut remettre ça.
Ah non, t'es fou ou quoi? Ah, il faut que je vous présente. Marie-Claude, Rémi. Rémi, Marie-Claude.
Bonsoir.
Je vous laisse.
Elle est belle, non?
J'ai affaire à des hommes d'affaires.
What is interesting about this sequence is that the meeting that takes place, a drink is taken, and it is clear that trust is established between the two people. Several levers are tried during this sequence to see if Rémi Prieur is receptive to these levers. Why choose these levers? Because Rémi works in nuclear research, a field where the staff is rather sensitive to this type of risk. So the only way to access the information is probably through compromise to get information and possibly using a financial transaction. Later, Bill explains the apparent ease of doing business. Here, he invites him for a drink in a luxury suite. We observe that without saying anything, Rémi Prieur is rather receptive to the size of this room. He makes a remark about the bathroom. The second thing is to see if he will be receptive to the compromise with the introduction of a prostitute in the room who will be left alone with Rémi. Once these levers have been identified, once the relationship of trust has been established, once we see that it is something that has been going on for a while and that lives on its own, that there is no need to maintain it, when it is the target person who maintains this relationship, then the recruitment phase can be started. This recruitment phase is marked by several elements. Firstly, the quality of the relationship. We will now introduce the notions of targets and target person. The target is the person who holds or has access to the information. The processor is the person who contacts the target. This relationship has to be of sufficient quality. The target has to have sufficient access to the information that is the subject of interest to the processor. To determine this, we need to ask ourselves some questions. Is this target likely to do something unconsciously? Are the levers defined? We have seen that the strategy can evolve from the environment phase to the approach or recruitment phase. The levers are the same. Some may be identified at the beginning, but will not turn out to be the most effective for the current operation. They will be modified, or at least they will not be preventing from being modified. The decision to recruit will also depend on the interest of the information transmitted by the target person. Generally speaking, recruitment is the normal continuation of the approach phase. It is not necessarily formalized during the relationship with the target, and it is not necessarily necessary to verbalize it. It is rather an element of feeling, a marker identified by the processor. We will study this marker and see how it can be determined with a video example. We will see here a rather natural orientation of the subject of interest of the treating person towards the target.
3 mois après le début de l'opération, Tel Aviv me faisait parvenir un message par la boîte aux lettres habituelle. Ils avaient analysé mes rapports, les écoutes téléphoniques et les enregistrements vidéo. Ils m'autorisaient à passer de la phase de contact à la phase de recrutement.
Dis donc, qu'est-ce que c'est que ce truc-là? Ça, c'est un appareil qu'on utilise en médecine. C'est un compteur de radiation. T'as trouvé l'eau? Ouais. Hop! Comment ça se fait que t'as ça dans ta voiture? C'est un échantillon, je suis associé à un type qu'on achète tout un lot. C'est une cigarette.
Ça peut pas marcher.
Quoi?
Écoute, je veux pas me mêler de tes affaires, mais le compteur, tel qu'il est, il peut pas fonctionner.
Comment tu le sais?
Je le sais. Tu connais ce truc-là? Et voilà. Dans les vieilles montres, il y a du radium. Un élément radioactif. Alors l'appareil doit réagir. Réagit pas. Alors celui-là est mal étalonné, ça peut arriver. Mais si t'en as tout un stock, ça veut dire qu'il faut tout vérifier.
Merdant. Faut que j'en parle à mon associé alors. Il faut un expert. C'est le bordel.
Je peux peut-être t'aider.
C'est gentil, je te remercie, mais c'est pas un prof de maths dont t'as besoin.
Justement, je suis pas prof de maths.
Non?
Non.
Once again, the recruitment phase was launched, but the subject of nuclear power was never discussed during the relationship. Remy introduced himself as a math teacher and naturally leading him to the subject of interest, which is the reason for this whole operation from the beginning. The principle goes through a common object remotely related to nuclear. In the car, we see that the target is wondering, thinking, hesitating. He decides on his own to give this information that he is not a math teacher, probably because he just wants to help his friends because he feels he's going to have a problem in his business. This is where the processor bounces back saying he needs an expert, and the target naturally responds by giving his real profession. It is this voluntary decision of the targets that constitutes the marker for the processor, and that the recruitment will start since the target is most likely crossing the line or will do so in the near future. We will now look at an example of the formalization of the recruitment that is going to be done by a third person, but really following the continuity of what we saw just before.
It's okay.
What I like about Mr. Haydon is he's very straightforward in business matters. It is a real pleasure to negotiate with him.
We are very good friends.
Isn't it too cold?
Looks fine.
Un recrutement est toujours délicat. On peut bien avoir préparé la cible pendant des mois, connaître tous ses travers, savoir exactement ce qui la motive et ce qui l'effraie. On ne peut jamais être certain qu'elle va tomber. Toutes les opérations reposent sur la chance. À un moment, il faut sauter le pas et se lancer dans l'inconnu. C'est la part de poker dans le renseignement. Un jour ou l'autre, il faut jouer son tapis.
Monsieur Prier, do you realize that you are sitting on a gold mine?
Really?
Quite a few countries would be willing to pay a great deal of money. More money than you can possibly imagine, to acquire some of the technology which is your specialty.
Well, I guess so.
You know, my company sells nuclear reactors to countries which do not possess such. For peaceful users, naturally. Tell me, have you never given thought to using this knowledge for your own profit? How would you like to work with us? You have the technology and we have the contacts. It would pay very well, plus a good commission.
Not bad.
You could begin by compiling some information. The nuclear plant you are designing is an excellent prototype.
something I don't like about this.
Tell me.
I would hate to leave Hayden out of this.
The target betrays, and the only thing that bothers him is that he finally leaves his friend, the processor, out of the business he's offered. This is the sign that the target is ready and becomes a source. The last phase, which comes at the end of the relationship life, is that the source who has been recruited is likely to lose access to the information that interests him/her, to change his/her professional situation, to evolve from personal point of view, to see his/her interests change, and therefore to have levers that no longer work. The source may also break down psychologically and nervously. In this case, the time has come to end the relationship, whether abruptly or not. We will now look at an example of ending a relationship abruptly.
C'est trop tôt.
J'ai peur que ce soit trop tard, moi, tu vois.
Il est loin de nous avoir tout livré.
On n'a pas le choix.
Oui, mais si on le brusque, il risque de tout abandonner.
Je sais. Pourquoi tu crois qu'on demande ce renseignement en urgence? Si on l'obtient pas, l'opération peut pas avoir lieu.
Je pourrais intervenir pour le rassurer.
Venez voir, il se passe quelque chose.
Rémi Rémi, ça va pas? Tu te sens pas bien? Ouvre, Rémi, ouvre. C'est long comme un âge.
Je me suis mis dans une situation pas possible.
Quelle situation?
Je sais pas ce que j'ai fait.
Qu'est-ce que t'as fait?
J'ai fait connaissance avec un type au foot. Il s'appelle Bill Hayden. Il est riche, sympathique. Il travaille entre Londres et Paris. Il fait des affaires.
Mais pourquoi tu parles comme ça?
J'ai fait attention. Je lui ai pas dit ce que je faisais. Régulièrement, on nous en parle au centre. On fait des réunions de sensibilisation. Je lui ai pas dit ce que je faisais.
Il est en train de tout cracher.
C'est moi qui lui ai dit ce que je faisais. Il avait ce problème avec son compteur.
Quel compteur?
Il avait ce problème avec son compteur. Il a acheté tout un tas de ses appareils. Il n'y connaissait rien. Alors, je l'ai aidé. Je l'ai aidé. Et j'ai rencontré l'autre. Allô?
Alors, Rémi? Salut, c'est Bill Hayden.
Salut.
Ça va, je te dérange pas?
Non? T'es rentré de Londres?
Oui, je suis rentré ce matin. Comment ça va, mon pote?
Ça va?
Dis donc, au cas où t'aurais décidé de tout raconter à ta bourgeoise, hein, n'hésite pas à lui parler de Marie-Claude. Ce serait dommage. D'accord? Et si jamais il y a un truc dont tu te rappelles pas, moi je peux t'aider, pas de problème. J'ai des cassettes vidéo, des enregistrements. Si par exemple t'as oublié quand est-ce que tu l'as enculé, ben moi je peux te dire que c'était le 12 novembre, tu vois. N'hésite pas à m'appeler surtout au cas où t'auras un trou. Allez, ciao.
Rémi? Où tu vas? Où tu vas? Encore? Mais qui c'était?
Ce genre d'incident peut être considéré comme une faute. J'avais surestimé la solidité de Rémi Prieur. Il fit une dépression nerveuse et partit avec Françoise dans sa maison de campagne du Limousin.
Here we see that the source breaks down, realizes what has been going on all along and is about to explain it to his wife. The decision is made to end the relationship abruptly as the level of compromise is used, so there is no way back. If we look back at all the phases we have seen since the beginning of human intelligence, who is someone who is likely to be exposed to it? It's people who have a favorable environment, who may or may not have responsibilities, someone who will facilitate access to information directly or indirectly. In any case, it can work, and we come back to this interest difficulty risk equation we've seen in the first module to determine which person is better to approach rather than another. When does it happen? Usually during networking events, either in private invitation, at trade fairs, conferences, private clubs, sports events, as we saw today in football, for instance. It can also be around a professional framework or through an extra professional relationship such as socializing. It can happen during holidays when we go to the hairdressers, to the restaurants. We just generally avoid family events, at least at first, so as not to expose ourselves publicly to other people.